thing that farmers are worried about the most, I think, at least corn growers, is tar spot. Some last year didn't have any, some had a lot, and they really don't know what to do about this coming year, whether there's what in words of responding to a possible threat that they don't really know is coming.
Right. So my first comment, and this is like my 7th season now of tarspot after finishing it, is that every season has been different. So first and foremost, we can see what happened this year, but I can't predict what's going to happen next year, because if we talk about tarspot, like many diseases, environment's going to play a key role when it starts in season. And so I know here in Indiana we have new areas that were hit really bad this season that hadn't previously seen the effects of tar spot. And then our normal areas that have seen it the last 4 or 5 years, year after year, it didn't come in like we expected. So again, this new disease keeps changing year after year depending on the environmental conditions.
As farmers look at the potential for weather and as they follow what may happen, what are those factors, those weather factors that they need to prepare for?
Well, we know now, after collecting a number of years of data, that it does still require cooler conditions. So when we're cooler in May and June, maybe, it kicks it on, but it also needs a lot of moisture. So we need a lot long leaf wetness for those spores to germinate and infect. But cooler temperatures initially to get it started, but then here in Indiana, I would say then it doesn't matter once we get it started in the canopy. It can get as hot as we want. We have the moisture conditions that allow the disease to continue to develop. So we look at some of the years where I would say 2021 was one of our years where we had a severe epidemic in northern Indiana, and then we compare to 2022 where we didn't see hardly any yield loss. And if we look at those years, I was just talking this yesterday on the maps, we had a cool, wet May, a drier June, a little warmer, but then a cool, wet July. And so it started in May, it may have slowed down a little bit, and then it took off in July. If that changes, and in 2022 we had a hot, dry May, June, that pushed the disease off, so it didn't start till later in the season. And so that's the biggest question, is when does the disease start in the season? If we're seeing it in our fields starting at the end of June, early July, we have a longer period that we have to protect that crop canopy in order to get to harvest. Versus if it doesn't start to the middle of July, August, less of a time frame to protect. Looking at management, first and foremost, I want you guys to look at your hybrids, and there's more data coming out on some hybrids that have some decent resistance. If we start with that already, we're kind of backing us up to minimizing the effect of the disease. And then also our fungicides will work, but this disease is one that's really going to show the limitations of our fungicides. It's going to tell us how good our coverage was through the canopy and how long they persist in the canopy to protect that crop.
So what are the fungicides that really do the best, regardless of the cost, if people are real concerned?
Well, I would say you have a choice. There's a large assortment of products. I would use the fungicide efficacy chart to look at some of those things. We do a rating on all the different products. There may be some that's a moderate group versus a very good group, but I think you have a range of choice. Most of the products we've seen does reduce tar spot in the field. It just sometimes some may persist a little bit longer than others. And then the other question I've been getting is going out multiple times, right? And that's the big numbers game we got to play, is with corn prices lower, the return on investment's a little tighter. And so I was talking yesterday, in general, say it takes $30 an application to get a product out. Let's just take that on average on your farm. You're going to need 7.5 bushels to cover that cost. If you're going to apply twice, now we double it, and you're going to need 15 bushels protection. That being said, sometimes tar spot knocks 20 to 50 bushels off, so that will pay if the fungicides are out there protecting. We've done a lot of data research on timing, and sometimes I've seen the products fail if we went too early, and sometimes I've seen it if we go too late. So there's a sweet spot. If I was just going to pick an area, the sweet spot from our data, I've not seen the VTR1 fail me when we have severe disease. It's still working, so you can start there, but maybe you hold on and wait to R3. So that's my window of optimum timing. If I can merge all the years together, that's my optimum timing, VT to R3. And then, but if you go earlier, maybe you got to come back in later and cover it, because we'll have a 3 to 4 week window of coverage. But then again, but if we wait too long, the disease gets access and we can't slow it down. So I talk about if you got 5% or more of that ear leaf with disease, it's game over. You waited too late. So you got to get ahead of it, but understand that there is a window in there we can optimize.
Anything other on tar spot that is?
No, I think there's a lot of information. There's a lot of meetings going on. You can probably catch me somewhere if you haven't heard it yet.
Okay. Tell me about soybeans. What are you hitting the boys with today?
So today we're going to talk a couple things. I'm actually going to give them a choice. If they got a disease of concern, we might jump around. But a few things I want to cover. We now have red crown rot here in Indiana. We've added a few more counties this year, and it's across the state. So I have stuff in northern Indiana, central and southern Indiana. So it's important to understand what's going on to make an informed decision on management. For red crown rot, I'm also going to talk about using fungicides for foliar diseases and then some of the risks we run into with fungicide resistance that we're seeing in some of the systems.
Red crown rot. Now, the people who have some drainage problems probably need to watch for it the most, I'm told. At least what I have seen is wet and fungus, and it's going to build up in there.
Yeah, so you can kind of see in those fields I've been in where it's been pulled and you can see where the water's running and stuff. But the biggest thing I think you need to know is it's not the other diseases you think are out there. And so that's the thing I think where we've been missing it, is that we think it's an SDS area or a no lipoer growing area, and really it could be red crown rot. And so that's what as we move into next year and we get into August and you start seeing those areas that are turning yellow, it's important to go out and look at it and sample and determine what is the real cause of why this area is not growing so well.
We can't prevent it, but are there varieties of soybeans that are more resistant than others?
We don't quite know that yet here in the Midwest, and that may be one of our issues is this wasn't on the radar for our varieties in the Midwest, and so the susceptibility might be higher. We are evaluating seed treatments, so I'd say stay tuned. There's some data coming out of Kentucky and Illinois on some of their trials where they have research areas that have the disease. I don't have a site that I have this pathogen to work on, so moving into next year I'll be working on some farms, maybe with some trials to look at seed treatments, but I don't want to put it on a research farm where we don't have it and it causes havoc in our other soybean areas, so.
Tell me about sulfur now. What are you? This is interesting.
Yeah, so Sean Castile and he was noticing that maybe sulfur was affecting SDS in his trials or reducing some of the SDS. So we moved ahead this year. We had some funding from Purdue to look at sulfur on SDS in particular. And so I'm going to share some data on that. You know, the effect of planting date, and our soybeans that are planted earlier are going to have a higher risk of sudden death syndrome developing. But then we also looked at adding different kinds of sulfur to the system to see if we can reduce some of that infection. Sulfur is a classic. It's one of the old fungicides that have been around. We've used it for disease control a long time ago, so it's not surprising that we see effect of this. And so I'm going to share today some of the data where we're seeing an effect of where the sulfur treatment did help minimize some of the SDS develop.
So when would we put it on? How much would we put on if we've got an SDS problem?
So where we did it was we put it right on after planting. We added the sulfur, just like he was looking at for sulfur deficiency into crops. We were kind of putting on the same kind of system where we would apply it at planting.
Field-wide or in spots?
Well, we'd have done a field application, a broadcast application.
Okay. And have we really been able to get a reduction?
Well, so some of our preliminary data where we've got two sites, we can see it, especially where I put in inoculum, so I kicked up the SDS. I can see a slight reduction in disease incidence and then some yield potential there as well. So I'll share some of that today, and that's a stay tuned. We're going to run it another year. Every year we need new data, right? And every year it might change. But that does look promising that maybe even in addition to the plants needing the sulfur, maybe a little additional sulfur can help us with our management of SDS.